My name is Silje Bakke. I'm a coordinator for the Norwegian National Archetype Governance. And I'm going to talk about that. I don't think I'll be spending 90 minutes, but I think if you could ask questions, if you have any questions, just ask them while I'm talking, and we'll just take them as we go along. I'm just going to start by talking about where we are. Obviously, we're in Norway. We're at the top of Europe. And Norway is, well, it's a small country. We'll only have about 5 million inhabitants. But in terms of area, it's quite large. And in terms of length, it's even bigger. Actually, from one end, for the southwest to the northeast of Norway, it's about 1,750 kilometers, which if you do it down into Europe, from the southwestern tip of Norway, you get down to Andorra. So it's quite long, which means that we have some long distances within Norway. You're here, and if you go a bit north of here, you hit this line, which is the 70th parallel. And if you follow the 70th parallel around the world, well, almost around the world, you get to a place called Dead Horse, Alaska. That's how far north you are at the moment. There's not much else this far north, except from in Norway. Now on to the interesting bit. The Norwegian public hospital system consists of 4 regional health authorities. The western, the southeastern, the central, and the northern. And altogether they have 24 hospital trusts, and each hospital trust have 1 or more hospitals. Some have up to 7, I think. And all of them use EHRs, but those systems are mostly what we call electronic paper. They're not structured in, well, not very structured at any rate. And there are 2 main vendors, Siemens in central Norway and DIPS in more or less the rest. Some of them, like Oslo University's hospital, is deploying DIPS this fall. But apart from that, it's mostly DIPS as we speak. In addition to the regional health authorities, we have one coordinating health trust called National ICT, which works on a more strategic level. And this archetype governance is organized under National ICT. And also in the Directorate of Health, we have a Department of eHealth, and they also do a lot of stuff. It's not directly connected to the hospital system. And OpenEHR in Norway, we're not using it clinically yet at all, but DIPS is implementing it, and it's being tested in hospitals. The University Hospital of Northern Norway, just right up the hill here, I've tested it for a while. And Oslo University Hospital will deploy ARENA in the trauma and A&E in October this year. To make sure that we get archetypes, or that we deploy archetypes of high quality, and that we get some sort of possibility of semantic interoperability, National ICT has developed a governance scheme for archetypes on a national level. We have employed 3 people, myself and my colleague John, who's up there, and also Halvard Lærum, which is who's the leader of the governance group. Now, we also bought a system called the Clinical Knowledge Manager from Ocean Informatics, which makes us able to do development in a collaborative fashion. We can share archetypes from one end of Norway to the other very easily while it's being developed. We can also do reviews and approvals, and we can also share archetypes after they've been approved. And this is the way it's organized. The editorial group at the top is the sort of organizing body. Also, the National Design Group has a more technical focus. There I actually haven't been started up yet, but we're in the process of doing that. Also, each region is supposed to make a resource group where clinicians can get help if they, for instance, I want to have this form in my EHR, then they have to go to their resource group and get help how to do that, how to make the archetypes, how to make the templates. And the resource groups then may make use of the design group if they need more help. The resource groups are also responsible for recruiting clinicians for reviews. The governance model, we've divided it into three phases. First, the development phase, where the archetype development is supposed to be done in a distributed fashion, where the local initiatives decide what's to be developed first. If, for instance, Oslo University Hospital wants to have a certain form for reporting their injuries from the A&E to the Norwegian Patient Registry, then they talk to someone. In this case, they've actually talked to DIPS about it because we hadn't started up yet. But we've based this on what's called a duocracy. Who's not heard of a duocracy before? Okay. A duocracy is sort of like a meritocracy, only instead of the people who are merited in some way gets to decide what's to be done, the people who actually do it get to decide in which way you do things, which means that it's as long as some people are willing to use resources to do something, it will get done. There won't be anyone who can sort of block you and say, no, we have to prioritize this. And of course, the regional resource groups are supposed to assist the initiatives in this process. And we also, of course, encourage the use of internationally defined archetypes. And during the development process, archetypes can be uploaded to the CKM, which means that we can do the development in several different areas of Norway without having to travel a lot. Then there's the review process, and I think this is the most important part of the governance model. The editorial group, when an archetype is submitted for approval, the editorial group initiates a review and specify the requirements for this review. For instance, the number of clinicians we need to have in this review, which specialties and which professions they need to belong to. Sorry. And then the resource groups are supposed to recruit the healthcare professionals. At the moment, since we don't have the regional resource groups yet, the members of the editorial group are actually doing the recruiting at the moment. And we couldn't have done this without the CKM, I think. It's the CKM has some very specific functionality for doing reviews, which I don't think we could have done it without it. Most archetypes will have to go through several review rounds, especially if there are changes, because if the changes made in the first round, then you would have to have a second round to make sure that everyone agrees to the changes that have been done. When there is consensus among the clinicians, hopefully, the approval phase starts. If you can't reach consensus, then we have the option of sending the archetype to there's a sort of general meeting of medical directors in national ICT that we can send the archetype to for sort of they can decide what should be done. But that's only if the clinicians don't reach consensus among themselves. Now, in the approval phase, the editorial group will assess the quality of the review, not of the archetype. They will assess have the number of clinicians that we wanted, the correct professions and specialties been involved, and a few other parameters. And if the requirements are met, the archetype is approved. And then they're marked as published in Clinical Knowledge Manager, which means that they're free to use for everyone, and you can at that point expect some level of stability for that archetype. We would like to share what we make ourselves or improve from the international community. And we would like some input on how we should do this in a good way, because when we do this for ourselves, it will obviously be in Norwegian. Should we translate things into English so that other people can use it more easily? Anyone?
Should we do it in English then?
Well, it would be harder to get Norwegian clinicians to do reviews then.
You sure?
Because not everyone is really good in English to the point that they can actually do their work in English. You can probably keep up a conversation, but I think Thomas first.
I would have thought. I mean, I think if you want to get access to outside opinion and also enable everybody else outside, well, the Scandinavian countries to search archetypes and tools to research in English would be good.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it's probably overkill to force it to be there early on in the process.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, I'm sure there's lots of Norwegian clinicians who look rusty in English or don't normally think in medical English and they don't need to.
Mm.
Why should they? So it sounds like it would make more sense to do an English translation at the publishing
Mm-hmm.
stage or some later stage. Now that's going to cost the ministry or some central government. That's going to cost a resource, and you're going to have to convince them that there's payback for that.
Mm.
But I think that sounds to me like the sensible thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
That means your internal process works the way you just have it in Norway and not worry about the outside too much.
Yeah.
I think, well, I'll stop there. The publishing point seems to be the one where if translation could be done into English, that's what makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Gunnar?
Well, I would generally support what Tom is saying, but I think there is at least 3 different problems. One is when you in Norway are reviewing the internationally published archetypes,
Mm-hmm.
you want to translate them into Norwegian. If it's a pure translation, adding Norwegian text where it's appropriate, then it's not really an issue. But I understand that already you have then made changes to some of the archetypes that are published on the open air CPMT.
Yeah.
And I am really concerned that there will then be a deviation which the rest of the world don't know of. And maybe these are very valuable comments that come from this review in Norway. But the idea of having this international collaboration is, I think, that you should also then provide that discussion to the international side.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the problems. The other problem is to have a lively discussion among Norwegian experts, clinicians and IT people, where I'm not sure you have tested how willing the clinicians are to discuss this in writing in English. I certainly think that they would understand things, and that many of those that participate are actually quite accustomed to also writing something in English, but there's no problem, as I see it, to have the discussions in Norwegian language, especially in the Norwegian CKMT, of course, but also in the international, you can actually have a project where you can discuss in whatever language you want, even if the actual design of the archetype is done primarily in English with then some national language additions. The third problem is when you design completely new archetypes for use in the Norwegian healthcare context only. And I think many of those would also be of interest to other countries, especially the other Scandinavian countries. And so I hope that you at least would translate the sort of finished products into English and make that available. Thank you.
So would it be helpful if for instance, if we got an archetype from the NITA or the OpenEHR CKMs and then changed it in our CKM to make a sort of short description of the changes we made and the arguments for them and take it back to the originating CKM in the discussion there? Ian's nodding, so.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting and difficult area, obviously, because I think the priority is for you to get local engagement. You know, that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And if that means being in Norwegian primarily, then, you know, I would absolutely agree, go with it. There's always going to be this tension between local versus international, and much as we would all like this to be one big international effort, I think we have to recognise that there isn't really that huge appetite and driver, and to some extent people just have to learn. They've got to get comfortable with this environment first. So even in English-speaking languages, you know, NITA effectively forked the international archetypes and just did their own thing for a while. I suspect, give it another few years and they'll come back into, if you like, and recognise, why are we doing this ourselves? You know, there are very few changes. And this whole issue of feeding back change requests to, you know, a higher repository, if you like, or a more international or, you know, it's the same problem going from vendor to regional to national. It's always, how do we get the message back from the periphery, if you like, back to the central shared common good? And we've made some changes just very recently to make CKM work a bit more like GitHub, where you've got formal change requests. We haven't thought through about how that would be internationalized, but it's probably something that, you know, would be worth starting to understand better through the work we're doing here.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for those comments. I'll make sure to bring them along in our continued work. Now, we've only been doing this for a few months. The governance model wasn't approved until October last year in National ICT, and the editorial group was formed in January, and we got the CKM online in February. At the moment, we've had 3 archetypes on review. We're planning on doing another blood pressure, obviously, and height and length and body weight. And we're planning on doing pulse and respiration rate and what were the others? Body temperature and muse. Now. The experiences from those 3 first reviews are that the clinicians, we're actually getting clinicians from all over the country, which is a really good thing. And they're giving us some really good input, both on language issues mostly, but also on structure. And the CKM is working really well for reviews. There's also some improvement needed for the governance model, mostly relating to archetypes that aren't reusable. For instance, for a while we'll probably have to have some registry-specific archetypes. For instance, where a registry would ask, has there been an MRI, has there been a CT done, and have this list of questions. And you would at some point you would like to just do search or query in the EHR for that, but for a while we probably won't have that data in a queryable structure in the EHR. So we'll probably have to have them as simple questions for the clinicians to answer when they're filling out the forms for these registries. And these archetypes will obviously have to be governed as well, but we think we should have to have some kind of fast-track approval process for these, because they're not really intended to be reusable, and they should be at least considered for replacement with queries after a certain amount of time, for instance 3 years or something. So we're working on that. I have some clinician responses from the first-time users, and I think this shows that clinicians actually get this. These are clinicians who haven't really had any prior experience with archetypes or the CKM, and I think it looks like they get what we want from them. It could be because our clinicians are extremely smart, of course. Yeah, Thomas.
Wondering, why did you choose those basic vital signs archetypes? Is it because people were seriously thinking that they might add some special, add some new Norwegian knowledge to blood pressure, or is it just to get people habituated to the process and so on?
Well, mostly because they're relatively well developed in the international space.
I'd be surprised to find that there weren't at least somebody from Norway who probably participated on one of those already, just purely in the CKM.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know about that actually, but it might be. Yeah, mostly because they're really well-known concepts that most clinicians relate to. Yeah. And they're relatively easily structurable.
But wouldn't you have started from the premise that you potentially would trust those ones to be pretty good, and you would start on some area that looks like that isn't very well covered in CKM, of which there's lots of specialties and other.
Well, we're doing that as well, but those archetypes aren't actually at the level where we can start to do reviews quite yet. We're working with Ian and Heather on, for instance, lab tests and biopsies and imaging test results, but they're much more complex concepts and archetypes, and I don't think they're ready for review for a while yet.
I agree with the approach. So I've also been doing some, if you like, local work with a UK CKM, which is mostly around medications and adverse reactions. Work for the people who were here yesterday. The little MedsRec demo was based around these archetypes, and medication in particular is way more complex, and it has been harder to get people engaged just because it's hard stuff to get your head around. So I think I understand what Tom's saying is, in a sense, this is probably ideally the kind of stuff that should happen in an international space. Uterine weight is, that's not a specific Norwegian thing, but you've got to get you people engaged. You've got to get them using the tool and understanding it. And it, I can absolutely understand why you're doing what you're doing, even if it seems suboptimal to the rest of the room. It's a process, And the bottom line is, if your clinicians are getting this, that's a big step forward, because it's hard. This is unfamiliar territory for them.
Okay. Now, as I said, we're planning to doing the respiration rate and pulse and muse and temperature. After that, the priority is support for the initiatives where deployment is. Is that me or you? Okay. Like Oslo University Hospital is going to deploy this in October, so that means that they will have to have their archetypes reviewed and hopefully, hopefully approved before that. Also improving the governance model, for instance, relating to the registry-specific archetypes. Also, of course, recruiting more clinicians, and also get wider support from the professional organizations like the physicians and nurses associations in Norway. And also reusable archetypes are a priority. And people sometimes ask what we mean by reuse. I'm not going to read through this, but these are some of the things that we think we should use this for. Some in the short run and some in the long run. Reporting to registers is one of the things that we think we can use this for relatively soon. While decision support is probably a little bit further along the road. Sorry? Isn't it working?
Yeah, we have a strange noise.
Well, it's probably me just touching the antenna. I'll just move it here. Will this work? Oh, by the way, Muse is a modified early warning score, I think. It's used as a simple it's a simple tool for mostly nurses to check if a patient is getting worse. Yeah.
There's a variation called News from the NHS England.
Uh-huh.
It's NEWS.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's probably more structured to work with.
Okay. I'm not sure if that's in use in Norway, but if it is, we'll definitely do that as well. Yeah. Oh, you got one. Oh, great. Will we be able to? Well, we're actually. It seems like we're able to catch the interest of clinicians. Will we be able to keep it? I don't know. I think that depends a lot if we can actually get this in production relatively soon. If we can't see any results from this work, I don't think the clinicians will keep doing it. Will they agree with each other? Will we have consensus? I don't know either. What are the experiences for that like in the international space? Do you get consensus?
Actually, it's too early to say that. Where we've published so few archetypes and actually run it through, I think they're good enough. I think we know that even though a lot of these archetypes haven't been through the full cycle, they are actually being used. Now, whether there's full consensus, I doubt. I don't think we'll ever get that. But are they good enough for most vendors to use for most circumstances? Absolutely, yes. And lots of people are taking advantage of that already.
Yeah. Will the vendor support be good enough? We don't know that yet either, actually. What we do know is that the vendors will have to not only implement the standard correctly, but they have to implement all of it. If they don't implement all of it, we might have to make vendor-specific archetypes, and we don't want to do that. And the last one is a question that's been asked a lot by some opponents. Why will this work this time? It's never worked before. We tried this since the 70s or 60s or something, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked till now. And I think the archetype structures themselves, because we're doing this bit by bit instead of saying we're making this huge terminology or ontology or whatever, and then we're trying to use it. We're making archetypes and we're hopefully putting them into production one step at a time. And I think that's a big difference. Tools. We have tools that clinicians can actually use themselves on the internet. And they have some sort of social media kind of feel to them. And I think that might help us make the clinician feel some sort of some sense of community. And I think that's really important for making this work. And of course, there's the archetypes being maximum data sets. So we don't actually need the clinician. We don't have to lock all the clinicians in the room and wait for the white smoke to come up. We can just add it if they need something else, and we don't have to make them agree.